Well, welcome everybody. So my name is Nathaniel Van Kirk. I'm a clinical psychologist and the vice president of OCD Massachusetts. And so on behalf of the OCD Massachusetts board, I just wanted to say thank you all very much for joining us for our virtual version of the Les Grodberg Memorial Lecture Series. And so this lecture series goes on every month, the first Tuesday of the month at 7 o'clock. We used to have three kind of across the state that were taking place in person. With this year, we've kind of switched to virtual and combined them all into one. So thank you all so much for joining us. It's great to see so many people coming out. And so what you'll see up on the screen kind of in front of you is everything that we're kind of doing, just try to keep engaged and kind of hear what events are going on. Is you can follow us either on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, on YouTube. We'll also be posting many of these lectures as we edit them and post them, as well as some of the past lectures that we've been working on editing. So over time, all of those will be posted so that you can rewatch them or share them with others. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us at ocmassachusetts@gmail.com, or you can reach out to us directly and be happy to get back to you and answer any questions that you might have. And so today, for our beginning of our new year, it's a pleasure to have Dr. Jason Elias, who's the founder and director of CB Team in Arlington, and also prior to founding CB Team was the clinical director of the McLean Hospital OCD Institute. Also one of the people that brought me up to Massachusetts and was my supervisor while I was a postdoc and my mentor throughout my time here. So it's a pleasure to have you on today, Jason, and thanks so much for joining us and looking forward to our discussion on diffusion and some ways that we can kind of use it in treatment as we move forward.
Great, thank you so much. We were so lucky to have you. And I'm lucky that we still get to work together.
I paid you to say that, so. But
no, it's true.
But so for everyone that's here, we're gonna have a little bit of a discussion as we go through today. And so we're gonna kind of take the share screen away. And then as we discuss, if you have questions, please feel free to share your questions either in the Q&A box or in the chat. You can also raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question, and we can kind of give you access to talk so that we can kind of have a discussion as a group, and we'll give that a try. I'll try to keep track of all the different hand raises, Q&A questions, and chats. So if you do have questions you'd like me to read out to Jason or ask Jason as we go through, please put them in the Q&A box or raise your hand, and we'll try to have a discussion in a virtual setting as we go forward. And so with that, I'm going to stop the screen share, and so we can go ahead and get started. So Jason,
cool.
Thank you again for joining us. And I'll hand it over to you to get started.
All right, thank you. I'm just gonna move around some of these boxes I opened up so I can see you. So thanks everybody for tuning in. I was telling Nathaniel, this format is very new to me. I haven't presented at all in over a year. I was on a panel a couple of weeks ago, but that was a little different because I didn't have to prepare a specific topic. So this is the first time I've presented in a long time and a format that's totally new. So I decided it'd probably help me if I talked to Nathaniel and took questions as we go, rather than trying to do something really formal and canned. The topic, I think it was actually around this time last year, I was supposed to present on bathroom habits, and that got moved to May, and then we didn't do it. And I thought, bathroom habits I can talk about just off the cuff really easily because I've done it so many times, but I wanted to push myself to do something different and a little more challenging. Oh, that's right. You want everyone to see me, but I don't want to see me. So big. I'll deal with it.
So I can hide your view, I think.
What's that?
I can either hide your view or we can switch it back to gallery if you prefer that. Is that better?
Well, I just pinned you, but I hope everyone can still see me.
Yeah, everyone can still see you. So you're good to go.
Okay, cool. Perfect. Oh yeah, so I wanted to challenge myself by talking about diffusion because it's something I haven't done before. I mean, I've done it in sessions and I've done it with, with colleagues and things, but I've never presented this topic. And I think it's a really important one, and it's been very useful to me personally. So you don't have to know anything about this coming into tonight. We're gonna I think I'm just going to talk about a few basic things, and then the Q&A will direct me to what level of detail you guys want to hear about. So starting off about what diffusion is. It sounds like the word diffusion, like something that's diffuse and sort of spreads through something. This is a different word. It's de-fusion, diffusion. So like something being fused to an object versus something being diffused. And I'm not really sure if diffuse is actually a word or was a word before this concept was talked about in the acceptance and commitment therapy model that Steve Hayes developed. And that model has lots of different features, and they're all interesting and useful, and they all work together. But we're zeroing in on diffusion for a few reasons. The main one is when I'm struggling, it tends to be the thing that I go to first. And it helps me start to sort of work back to being in the present and doing things that work better for me. And if acceptance is your goal, I feel like it's hard to accept something when you're fused with it. So in the OCD world, this would be like someone who's afraid of a virus, let's say. Something like HIV used to be a very common thing people were worried about. And so if you imagine someone being fused with this fear that they could maybe contract HIV from, let's say, a doorknob, if they have never learned anything about the actual transmission of HIV, then it would be really hard to start doing exposures with someone who really believes and is fused with that thought. But like most people with OCD, they have done tons of research, and they probably know more about HIV than most people. And so they have this information and still fused with the fear. But if you have this other information, you might be able to sort of decouple those a little bit. And then it's more likely that you'd be willing to try something different. So at that level, I feel like diffusion is really an important concept. And we'll, like in the course of the talk, I want to get into things like, well, is this something that people could use for avoidance in some way? And do I need to be careful about that? The short answer is I don't think so, but we'll get into more detail. So diffusion is a concept, and we'll talk about the concept, but I wanted to make a point of mentioning that it's also an experience. And that's really what I want all of you to have and to be able to notice more often is your actual experience of diffusion, not just the mental concept, but the concepts might help you get there. And so when I was preparing examples and ideas for tonight, I wanted to take a moment to position those examples, like basically to give you some guidance as to how to think about them or how to use them. So Nathaniel and I actually have been golfing. We haven't golfed together in a long time, but we used to golf together once a week. Don't judge us for that. The way we used to keep score was like in golf, a low score is good, if you did not know. But for Nathaniel and I, a high score was good because we would just keep track of how many balls we found in the woods. So if I scored a 5, I was walking home with 5 extra balls instead of being, losing 5 balls.
For everyone that you found, you're better off. You get a bonus point for everyone you find in the woods while you're looking.
Yeah, exactly. So the examples of diffusion or any like little sort of tricks or tips that we do tonight, I think of those as like a swing thought. A swing thought is something that a golf coach might say to their athlete to help them do something that's really complicated. If you think about what a golf swing involves, it's velocity and timing, and the golf club actually bends a lot when you swing it. And there's just a lot going on there. You could fill books and books about the physics involved and what needs to happen when. Think of all the different muscles that will be firing together and at different times to make this thing happen. It's really, really complicated. So you don't want somebody trying to, we wouldn't even try to keep track of all that stuff. But if you imagine someone has practiced this movement and they've gotten pretty good at it, but then in the course of playing, they're thinking about, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Like, I've got to do this or that. Like, there's a lot of stuff going on. So you might give them some thoughts, to have in mind that just kind of anchors them to engage this complex movement. So one that I remember really well from one of our golf partners was this phrase, low and slow, back and through. Just to remember to try to, do those few things when I'm swinging, but really it's like, hundreds of things that are probably happening, and that just ties it together. So if I do one of these, give you an example, and it seems kind of hokey or it seems too simplistic, just remember the examples themselves aren't diffusion, or they're not supposed to be like a button you press and then you have this experience. They're just something that might help you engage this thing. And you all know how to do it. It's something we do naturally. So the point of tonight is just to talk more about it, to help you become more aware of it, so that it becomes something that's more under your direction, something that you can make use of when you're suffering with something, rather than it just being this sort of state of awareness that you are sort of like sometimes fused, sometimes defused. It happens all day long. It's like, what if we could spend a little more time learning how to practice it so that you can use it to your advantage? So that's really the goal for tonight. So I mentioned it comes from acceptance and commitment therapy. I want to really make sure to say that diffusion, or being in a state of being diffused, is related to your thought process. That's the simplest way to think about it. It's referencing, how am I relating to my thoughts right now? Am I treating an object as it is, or am I treating an object or an experience as the name for what it is? So like, to make it very, very simple, in my office, my old office, I had a coffee cup that had pens in it. Now that has never confused anyone or thrown them for a loop where they were afraid that I might be drinking pens between meetings. It's really natural for people to know, oh, we call it a coffee cup, but it's holding pens. There's no problem with that. So that's an example of where, if you were fused with the name coffee cup, if you're fused, like, this is the cup, this is the label. If you're in a state of fusion, it would blow your mind to see pens in that cup. You'd be like, what? The properties and the characteristics and the purposes of a cup are to fill it with liquid and to drink it. That's all it is, and that's all it will ever be. That's fusion. Diffusion is like saying, oh, I've got all these pens, I need to put them somewhere. Oh, that cup will work. Or I have an art project due. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this thing. I have to do a mosaic. I don't have any tiles around here. And you're like, oh, that coffee cup is like not one of my favorites. I could smash it up, and then I could make my mosaic out of the pieces of that cup. So when you're diffused, this is another reason why I find it really useful. Being diffused helps you enact or engage your creative problem solving and your cognitive flexibility, so that you can make use of not just the physical things in your world to solve problems or to improve your life, but this internal world that we have. And I've always thought it was really sort of fascinating and frustrating that we can be so flexible in the world around us, like very, very flexible. Like, these were the notes I was supposed to be referencing if I forgot my place. Now they've become a teaching tool. So this could become a ball that we use for something. And again, like, I don't think any of you are confused by that, and you can see how you might use it like that.
Yeah.
But if my anxiety shows up, it feels, and I experience and relate to that as anxiety with like a period at the end. Like, that's just what it is. And of course, I have my own version of all the different characteristics and labels and properties that I attach to my own anxiety, and what it means for me, what it means for this moment, how it's going to affect what I'm doing. You know, there's a lot of stuff that's associated with an anxious feeling or an anxious thought. And if I can become more like kind of a little bit looser with the label for the experience I'm having. The experience is, let's say we're talking about anxiety. That experience might be a sensation in my stomach, a sensation in my heart, my breathing. That's what that is. The name for it might be useful. It might help me do something with that anxiety, or it might be a barrier in some way. And that's why it's, I'd say it's not really good to be diffused or bad to be diffused or fused. It's really about kind of where you're wanting to go in life. So like at a movie, an example of when fusion might work well is like at a movie where you're really in it and you're feeling all the excitement or the thrills and humor, whatever it is, of this movie. It's kind of like fused with your experience there. And then being, let's say, defused from the story they're trying to tell would be like, I wonder what city they're filming this in, or what are they doing with the lighting? It's like, there's kind of like stepping back. And
would it be fair to say it's almost like a curiosity about
yes,
kind of
yes.
the experience or the thoughts? Because it kind of sounds like, I'm thinking back to your golf example of like our 5 in-the-morning golf trips, of like the idea of kind of like shanking one into the woods. And it was like the difference between like that was a failure, or that was atrocious, and wanting to like chuck the club across it versus, oh, it's an opportunity to go get a few extra points by scavenging free balls from the back of the woods. So would that be similar to that concept of diffusion?
Yes, exactly. Or the thought that, you know, that bad swing is somewhere on the way to the swing I want. So when you know you're thinking about your OCD, there are times when, so I'm in that movie and I'm noticing the lighting or the casting and things like that. That might be enjoyable to me, but if I want to be immersed, I just want to be able to enjoy the movie. Thoughts like that will interrupt that and can be really frustrating. And trying to fight with those means I'm going to be sort of fused with these thoughts. I'm not really, like the point wasn't to fight with my thoughts about, oh, I want my brain to be in this movie. So, you know, like maybe tonight will help you enjoy movies, but what I really want it to do is help you enjoy your life, where the intrusion of OCD into your life will pull you off track and pull you down a path that isn't helpful to you. And being defused just means now you see everything and you can make different choices. So it's not meant to be an anxiety reliever or to get you out of what the experience is. It's actually, in a way, something that can bring you much closer to your experience. Because remember, with that fused anxiety thing, if it's just bad and I need to get rid of it, then I miss a lot of potential there for what it might actually, what else it might mean for me. So there's layers to these experiences or perspectives you can take where, you know, like my anxiety about tonight is useful to mention to other people who are anxious, or maybe useful to talk to about tonight with my kids, to be able to share that part of it so that they might learn that being anxious is okay and just part of a process. So my thought about my anxiety might be sort of stuck on this is bad. I can't do what I want to do with this around. And if I just even ask myself this curious question, what else might be there? How else might this be useful? Then I can, you know, almost always come up with something. But you don't even have to do that part. Sometimes just achieving a bit of diffusion and loosening up just brings you back to what's in front of you, and you just kind of move forward. And it's not really like thinking through that thought and where it came from. It's just, being back in the moment.
So it sounds like, just to kind of summarize what I'm hearing you say, is this idea of like noticing the thought for what it is, kind of like a thought, and being able to take that step back to kind of fight that tunnel vision that in many ways is kind of hardwired into that fight or flight response. But when you get too far into it, sometimes it's hard. You have to kind of take that step back to be able to see the broader picture and choose what direction might be the most kind of helpful for you.
Right.
So I think that
Exactly.
dovetails with one of the questions that I see Bill has a question here about how to use diffusion to not get lost in the content or the pull of the obsessive or ruminative thoughts. So like kind of getting stuck in this pull of like deep regrets or kind of that ruminative cycle or obsessing about obsessing cycle. So kind of from those examples that you're describing, how could you use that diffusion strategy kind of in that type of situation?
Right. Well, that's a great question Bill's asking. And I did prepare an analogy, I suppose, for this. So I had the golf version, but another one that's always really helped me is the magic eye posters. If that's probably dating me. Magic eye posters were, I think, computer generated. And when you just kind of glance at one, it looks like they're usually very colorful, but it doesn't really look like much. It just looks like, some pixelated poster. But if you focus your eyes the right way, then an image will pop out. So like I remember one when I was a kid that I think it was waves and dolphins jumping in the waves. So I was looking at this poster and there were people around looking at it going, oh, so cool. And I was like, I mean, it's nice, but what is it? And they're talking about these dolphins. I'm like, I don't know what you guys are talking about. And the swing thought, the thing they tried to give me to be able to see it, so this was like a cue for diffusion in a way, was they told me to unfocus my eyes, which I found not helpful at all. And so like some of the things I tell you tonight, you'll be like, I don't get this. This isn't helpful to me at all. And that's okay. If you just trust, I'll show you that you already know how to experience this. You just trust that you'll find your own versions of these things. So with the magic eye, what helped me more was, being curious, learning about it a little bit, and then understanding that if you focus your gaze past the picture, so you're not really blurring your vision or unfocusing, you're just focusing past the picture, then you start to see this stuff. So one example might work for some people and not for others, and that's totally fine. That's normal. So in this case of the magic eye, when I learned to focus behind the picture, the image came into view kind of on its own. Like what I had to know was try to focus past this picture, but the image came into view on its own. And that's kind of when you say, how do I use diffusion not to get lost in the content? It's like that. You'll develop a few ideas that kind of put you in the direction of diffusion, and then it will come into focus on its own, which just means you will be aware of thoughts and labels for your experience. And then you can start making up your own, make your own path, so that it's not like diffusion gives you an answer. It just puts you in a place where you could say, well, now with these obsessions, ruminations, deep regrets, like, what do I want to do? It's sort of like, well, now what? And then you can decide. And I think for rumination, most of the time what that is, well, I just would rather be here, like doing this, like watching TV, sitting in this chair, whatever it is I'm doing. And so it can help you set aside rumination really effectively. For deep regrets, maybe those are things you have already figured out they're not something you should dwell on. And so like a rumination, you would just set it aside. But it also, and this is why diffusion can deepen your experience and appreciation of painful things rather than suffering with them. It might allow you the space and creativity to make better use of those deep regrets to change something about the way you're living, or to use those previous experiences as learning. Regrets really a barrier to learning in my experience. I suffer with perfectionism and social anxiety, and I still have this tendency, but for years I would scrutinize what I do and then find the problems and then just regret them, wish they hadn't happened, or wish I could edit them out of my life. And that didn't really help me improve or learn anything. So some examples that have helped me defuse from regret are, actually I didn't even prepare to talk about this one, but if any of you know what rumble strips are, or guardrails on the highway, rumble strips are those little cuts in the pavement that if you veer out of your lane, the whole car shakes and it makes an awful noise. It's like, you know, really, it'll rattle you and scare you. So that's a mistake. You veered out of your lane and you've been startled by this painful experience. And thank goodness, because now you know where you are and you're back on track, you're in the moment. And so that's wonderful. And maybe I might have even learned something about how I should drive. Regret doesn't do that. Regret is just like, oh, I wish that hadn't happened, and like beating myself up and all of that really gets in the way of my learning. So when I've hurt someone or I've made a mistake, that rumble strip idea has helped me so much to sit with what has happened and to apologize more earnestly, you know, not out of fear or the horror that I did something wrong, but more out of compassion for the person I hurt and a genuine interest in not wanting that to repeat itself. And so it's when I'm defused from a mistake that I've made, I can actually hold that mistake much closer to me and kind of be like, I'm grateful for this, because if I don't like doing these things, having this example is great. Like, I don't have the same blind spot I had before for this. Now I'm much more aware and I can hold on to those things that we call negative experiences.
Almost looking at that context again a little differently as a way to kind of wake you up for, all right, so this is where I'm headed. This is what I want to do next. What I do differently. These are things that I missed before.
Right. Exactly.
Great example.
Exactly. Yeah. So if I'm lucky, I've kind of talked about it and I've practiced a little bit, this concept of rumble strips or guardrails on the highway. And then that becomes a thought that might be associated with my next mistake. In addition to all the stuff I've had forever about how I'm a bad person and this shouldn't happen. And, you know, if I can think about how it should go, I should be able to execute. You know, like that golf swing. If I understand how it works, shouldn't I be able to just do it? But that's really never what our life is like. Sometimes we get lucky, but if we have a mental model or a simulation for something that we want to achieve, that's very different than the actual experience of going through that.
Yeah.
So just remembering that's a related concept. I think I should do something, you know, do one of my, I've got all these props surrounding me.
Okay. And so let me throw out I saw two questions I'll kind of throw out real fast, and then maybe one of the examples can kind of relate to that is, you know, can diffusion help to figure out the observing mind, and, you know, how can you use it when you're in a lot of distress? I think are some common themes that are coming up.
Great question. Okay. So, you know, I don't know, these answers are won't be sufficiently detailed or scientific, but the first question about the observing mind, my quick answer is the observing mind is what will help you with diffusion. It's like an ability that you have. So I don't know exactly what is meant by figuring out the observing mind. I'd want to use language to help you by like, you know, trust is a big, you know, it's like a buzzword for this, or faith, just to have faith that you have an observing mind, or trust that you have that observing mind. And that if you create an intention to notice when you're fused more often or defused, then you're more likely to notice it. So that's been the problem with anxiety disorders. It's like your brain's rehearsed all these things that you should be looking for. So even if there's like, you know, like I used to draw famous logos very poorly to illustrate this, that even a really bad drawing of like a Coke bottle or the McDonald's arches, people can usually pick those out even when they're really degraded images because they've seen it so many times. So if you have insecurities about yourself or you have obsessions about different things, it doesn't take much, just even like the fuzziest sense that something might be dangerous or bad for you. It's like, oh my gosh, it snaps into view right away. So there's a long history of that. And we shouldn't expect to like erase that. One of the famous examples in Acts is Mary had a little, and lamb should have come to mind unless you've not heard that. You can't really get rid of those things that you've learned forever ago. But you can also still say, well, Mary had a little doggy, or had, you know, you can watch.
Not the right answer.
Yes. Yeah. You can, you know, have that kind of initial reaction and just be aware that that's how my brain works. It's going to fill in gaps, and it's going to just pick the first thing that it can associate with this. What else is there is like that question that might lead you to other ideas. Oh, hey, Lisa. Thanks. I'll let Nathaniel read that to see if there's a question I can answer.
So, yeah, I'll kind of read out. So, Dr. Lisa was on, just threw up an example as well to kind of add to this of, you know, the story of two young fish swimming. An older fish swims by and says, "Hey, how's the water?" And then two younger fish swim along for a bit, and then one goes, "What the heck is water?"
Mm-hmm. That's a really good example of when we're just fused with something and we can't see it. It's so familiar to us.
You can't quite see the context that's around this.
Yes. So what I'm going to do next is actually, that's a perfect segue, because this, I hope, will give you the experience of fusion, of your brain, your know-it-all brain, thinking it knows what things are and how you should feel about them and how you should respond to them. So this is a teacup. I have, I'm going to make myself a drink. This is just hot water. Can you see this, Nathaniel?
I can't quite see the cup. It's a little too far. There you go.
Okay. And what else do I have? Oh, some lemon. See here, this is honey. That's nice. Then I have some mustard. That's better, but it's not quite there yet. So if you're feeling disgusted or confused, that's probably related to fusion with maybe this thing, or that I'm sipping it like a drink. But suppose I had put it in this. And I haven't finished the drink. It's almost there. But if I had some salt and pepper, some olive oil, and maybe a little vinegar, I'd be really getting somewhere, right? These are just ingredients for a very famous salad dressing. You can make vinaigrettes with all kinds of stuff, but those are sort of like the basics: water, some mustard, honey, whatever you want to put in there. And I don't think, even if you didn't like vinaigrette, if I had lettuce here, this is a bit of sort of how context plays with you know, our use of language and context kind of go together to create these experiences. If I had this beautiful lettuce on the salad bowl and everything, even if you didn't like salad, I don't think you'd be confused. But I did this intentionally to kind of cue to mind what your brain thinks it's supposed to be doing with this stuff. And that it's kind of gross out of a cup, but it's just salad dressing. And if you like to cook, you taste things all the way through. So you're always doing that, but you're used to doing it with a spoon, maybe in a measuring cup or something like that. So this is just like an everyday kind of example of how you can create, you know, like this was a teaching tool, but there are, you know, like you could take sticky notes and put labels on things around your house, even just as a reminder that the name of this, the language I use is this, the thing is its own thing. It is what it is. It's not a cup. Cup is a sound I make to communicate this thing, and it's very useful. I think language is great. Language is, you know, part of the problem, but it's also the solution to OCD, along with, of course, like, you know, behavioral experiments and ERPs.
I think that kind of relates to this. One of their comments that had come up is the idea of trying not to hold on to your beliefs too tightly as a way to diffuse from thoughts. So try not to be too kind of like self-judgmental or hold on to those thoughts or those expectations, almost kind of like you're saying about your expectation of what you're making in a cup versus a salad bowl or a mixing bowl will be very different. And one of the questions was kind of out to the group was, do others have a similar experience of trying to step out of that judgmental kind of framework about your own thoughts and kind of have some levity about them? And right. You know, I know that, Jason, you and I, that's something you and I have talked about when I was a trainee, was kind of how to use humor effectively within those pieces.
That's right. And I think you're allowed to use humor anytime you want to try that. But we've all had that experience where we just like, it's not funny. Like, I just can't go there yet. Or we feel kind of, we either feel like it's impossible to see it a different way, or we're just not ready to, and we kind of dig in our heels a little bit about how we're feeling with things. So that's one version of fusion. And if you felt the disgust and then noticed something change when I showed you this, who knows what happened, but I bet it's sort of fusion and diffusion happening. Like, maybe you're like, oh, now I know what it is. Now I know it was salad dressing he's talking about, and salad dressing is okay to ingest. That's all fine. That's like another type of fusion in a way. You know, like, hopefully you had an experience of having kind of both of those things happening and knowing these things are still just sort of the raw materials of our life that we can use for different things. And again, internal experiences, they're raw materials too. They're communicating to us. They're trying to help us understand the world in all of its complexities, but they can't tell us what to do. And it's a primitive system that doesn't really know who you are or what you're trying to do. So if its first reaction is anxiety, our observing mind and this consciousness you have can be leveraged against OCD to sort of talk to it and say, I know what you think this is and what you're trying to say to me, but all the ways you've been trying to help me protect myself and protect other people have made me miserable, and have made a lot of those people who love me really stressed and scared for me, and it's diminished our lives. So I don't think it's achieving what I want it to achieve. And then from there, it doesn't tell you what exposure to do or any of that stuff, but it might just give you that distance that loosening up to then go talk to somebody about it, or to at least be curious about what might be possible. Go ahead.
So that seems kind of relates to, I think, one of the other questions that was up there was about using kind of diffusion even when you're in a lot of distress. In a sense, it sounds like that diffusion and what you're just in that example you're describing is almost a way to kind of get a little bit of distance from that distress, not to get rid of it, but to be able to choose a path forward,
right,
based on looking at the context a little bit differently.
Right. And this might sound counterintuitive or kind of like, well, yeah, maybe you can do it, but it is really hard. Like I think in general, it's easier to be playful with things that aren't stressful to us. To playing a game with kids and you're imagining things, you can turn a stick into a sword, and you can, be very playful and creative in that space because you're feeling safe and comfortable. But I also have found that when I'm at my worst, like when I'm struggling the most, that has become a cue for me that I'm not seeing everything here. Like, so I'm not necessarily, really defused and sort of, I don't know what it's supposed to feel like when you're defused. I guess the point is being fused is sometimes the thing that triggers me to get a little bit of distance in a way, because I'm so fused that I'm like, there must be more to this. And I use that phrase, and I use the word yet, Y-E-T, I use that quite a bit, where I say, I know there's more to this. There's something in this for me. I just can't see it yet. And what that does is it kind of just helps me stay open and stay curious so that I might find more meaning in it. And if not, I'm more open and curious at least about like, well, I can try these different things. Maybe like I've had some success with putting a thought in my pocket or asking other people to do that, or an emotion. It's like, well, maybe I can just carry this around. Like I'm the vessel for this feeling. I'm not doing it to work. It's not telling me how to live my life or what I'm supposed to do. It's just going to be part of this experience. And then I can see other things. And then from there, this is where it's sort of like other things will just come into view. You don't have to force that or find them as much as you think.
I think that's a great kind of tip and trick for what to do when the stress is there, is having those like kind of buzzwords in a sense. And I think it relates to one of those other questions about how can it help with doubt that comes up around an exposure.
Yeah.
Around kind of like, well, maybe there is another piece to it, but it sounds like what you're saying is kind of going at it with, we won't know until we try.
That's right. That's right. And yeah, and the emotions are real. They're, diffusion doesn't turn them into phantoms or illusions. It just helps you get to know them better. So like an emotion has some kind of inherent properties in terms of like how it tends to feel, or if you were really scientific about it, like where it occurs in your body and how the neurons work and all that. So there are some inherent properties like being hungry and how that affects mood. All of that stuff is useful. But if you think about it, say, okay, so they might have inherent characteristics or properties, but not inherent purposes. So the anxiety doesn't mean I have to do this. I have to diminish it, or I have to change what I'm doing so I don't feel that. It doesn't come with that kind of directive, but we often treat it that way.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so back to that idea that in the world around us, we are creative and we can, repurpose things for other uses. But then with this like nebulous, hard to pin down emotional system, everything, they all feel so fixed and rigid and stuck. So it helps me also become diffused and more curious to just think about how silly that concept is, that we talk about emotions that way, and create rules like, well, I'm like up to here with my anger, and if I have any more, I won't be able to take it. I'm going to blow. I'm going to, like we're basically creating an equation that we're going to solve by, acting out in our anger in a way that we don't like, instead of thinking, how did that come into being? This thing, I can't even tell you where it is. I know I'm feeling it, but I don't know if I have a capacity limit on how much anger I can feel. I could probably make more room and have that anger. And it doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to do something I would regret. It might be that I can do a lot of other things in the presence of this anger. So maybe I'm looking at the time, and I think I should maybe do a couple of other exercises that are more geared toward diffusion. So we use the T for fusion. The first one is a classic. The first like three are classic things you can do. So one way to practice, like just to help you, notice the state of diffusion, is to say this phrase at the beginning of describing a thought, where you simply say, I'm having the thought that. And by saying I'm having the thought, it's cueing to mind that, okay, I'm having this as an experience. The thought is a thing too. And I have thoughts and labels about my thoughts and how I'm supposed to think and feel. So I'm having the thought that blah, blah, blah. That little stem at the beginning is a diffusion technique. I've not really found that one useful, and I haven't practiced it much, so maybe I just need to work with it more, but that's a classic. Another version, I'll use the word milk. So if you're really doing this, the demonstration, you would maybe have all of you close your eyes and imagine some milk. And just notice whatever form it shows up in, if it's in a glass or in a jug or whatever. And you can really get into the details of, how it tastes, how it looks, how it smells, the experiences you've had with milk. And then we'll just say the word a bunch. Milk, 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 milk. Did you notice what happened to the memories of the experience when you just said it over and over again? Where did your attention go? And what did you notice? For me, whenever I was thinking about milk, just sort of is gone, and I'm feeling all these muscles that are getting fatigued, saying milk, 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 and the sound, it's more like gum milk, gum milk, gum milk. So it's a physical action to say that word, and it's a sound that's happening, and it's associated with that stuff that you might drink or not drink. But the two are different, and it's not a big deal that we get these things confused and we treat milk, the word like the substance. That's fine. But if you exchange that for other things, like a painful thought or painful memory, you can see how, like, looking at the form of the thought and the words that are in it and how many letters are in it, it really changes your experience of it. So sometimes people related to that concept will write out the thought and then decorate it, or use the letters of the thought to create a picture, anything that gives you a little distance. So it's a question that comes up a lot is, but what if this is a real thing that I have to deal with?
Like in hard thoughts or hard.
Yes, exactly. Or like tonight with the talk coming up, like I really do have this talk and I really do want to prepare. So the idea is that if I'm hung up on a thought that's about how I'm going to perform or how this thing might hurt me, if all my attention is there, I'm just going to have that tunnel vision experience. So if I do one of these techniques to get a little bit loose, it doesn't take away, like if there's a potential problem that needs to be addressed, it doesn't take away the problem. It just puts me in a different mental state where I might be able to find new ways to approach it. And so in the case of the talk, if I did one of these techniques to defuse from it, I might go do laundry or go do something else. Like if it's not a time when I really need to be sitting down and writing out the talk, or I'd be like, oh yeah, I really should probably sit down and work some of this out. So the diffusion just is like, okay, here I am, I'm back in my life. Now what do I want to do? So I still have to make a decision, and and have some new experiences and see what's working for me. And that's our whole life, like it's never, you're not going to diffuse from something and then have a path that's like really clear about what you should be doing. It's making choices, but your choices they're likely to be better when you have that frame of mind. So another one that I used to not like, but now I really do like it because I've just taken the risk to do it more, is singing thoughts that are upsetting to us. And so like if it's a particular intrusive thought that's like a phrase, you could sing the phrase. What I find works better is elaborating on that and like really creating a song about it and picking a song that you like or that fits with the thought. Mm-hmm. So somebody with relationship obsessions had thoughts like this. I won't sing the song because it was important for the exposure to use some curse words and things like this. But
we're a family friendly webinar, so we'll have to pause on the curse words, I guess. But
yes, and actually right now I can't remember the exact song, but it was a Van Halen song, the tune to a Van Halen song.
Nice.
And we sang these different, we sang the thoughts to that tune. I played some drums really poorly because I don't play drums. But what was great was like in just a matter of seconds, it was less than a minute, this person was really defused from a thought that had been causing them terrible suffering. But very quickly, this person's brain rushed in with, but what do I do now? Like I'm still worried about, this potential thing. But now you could talk about, well, but where is that thing? Like, what is it that you're responding to? If it's a thought in here, like a what if kind of thing, well, what's that doing to you? Has it improved your relationship to follow up on that thought? Like, what's been the impact? And usually there, it's very clear with OCD. Like, well, yeah, it's like stresses me out, stresses them out. You don't get anywhere. So then you're back to why it makes sense to live with uncertainty sometimes, because there's nothing for me to do right now. We're just watching a movie together, but my brain keeps thinking, oh, have they watched this movie with other people they dated? Or, what if they liked, this thing and that thing better? There's nothing to do except to have your life in that moment. Maybe sometimes there is something you can do. And if you're diffused, you're probably more likely to find something that's worth trying.
It almost sounds like that's one of the ways, I'm looking at kind of one of the questions that are coming up around like what to do about certain things that can't be ameliorated or things that can't be changed. And in a way, I think that last example a little bit of, kind of what can you do in that moment kind of in your life? It's not going to change that it's there, but it's similar to that uncertainty question is if we can't do anything about the uncertainty. So it sounds like diffusion is a way to kind of think about, well, now what?
Yeah.
What can I do instead? Right.
And there might be some new meanings that you can really believe in about that uncertainty. Like a lot of the time, your uncertainty is related to something that you really care about, but it's been covered over by the OCD and all the scariness of it when it's about caring for other people or caring for yourself. And that's not something we would be afraid of. But when it comes in this package, it's wrapped in this scary looking package, then you don't really get to that thing that's underneath it. It helps a lot with losses that people have too, because we need to feel those losses. And of course we have thoughts about how is life going to move forward after this thing and all of that. That's what it means to be devastated. But if that's all you have, then you miss how much this person has affected you, that you would feel that depth of loss. And maybe you miss things that are important to you about how you'll carry forward. Like this mug is very important to me. You wouldn't know that, but it's very important to me. If this mug breaks, I could be devastated even by that. This is important to me because of someone I lost that this reminds me of. And so if it breaks, then I might get caught up in like, oh, that was the thing and then missing that, that feeling that I had within me and my choice to keep this mug, those are things I did and I can do again. So of course I feel the loss, but maybe I'm less stuck in that feeling. Okay, a couple of other ideas. I find writing recipes to be like, this is all like more of a cooking seminar now. But I've written recipes for myself and for people I've worked with in therapy, where I say, well, I need like at least 2 cups of insecurity, like a healthy splash of doubt. I need to ruminate for 30 minutes. And just putting down all the things that I've been doing that I'm trying not to do, like where I'm like, gosh, I just don't want to be thinking about this so much. Putting it down in a recipe, it loosens me up and I get some space. Then what happens? Well, my brain is very good at this rehearsed rumination. So it's going to come back. And then like the recipe might help me again. So it's a process, of course. And if you do these enough, and I really think it only takes 1 or 2 really strong experiences where you have this loosened up state, then you won't even have to do the exercises. It becomes muscle memory, like in your brain, where you can sort of just find that diffusion that's going to help you.
Well, now I know when I'm kind of stuck in place, I'll think about, cooking with Jason. Will be my Joe, and see if I can pull from those pieces.
Yes. Yeah.
I know we have about 2.5 minutes left because we do have a support group that's occurring right after. Jason, do you have any kind of final thoughts? I know we have one more question that just came in around kind of the extent in which like fusion kind of is motivated as opposed to an automatic or reflexive inherent tendency. So how much is fusion something that we might feel like motivated or pushed towards doing versus an automatic or reflexive tendency? And is it necessarily enough to be able to recognize what's going on and open up more distance if you're struggling with this idea of necessarily not wanting to around certain subjects or topics? For example, anger, and kind of any suggestions on that internal conflict of how to succeed in diffusing when there's kind of that piece of you that's unsure if you want to yet.
Mm-hmm. So I have to think about this for a moment. So the first question is about to what extent is it motivated as opposed to automatic or reflexive? And I would say it's a mix. I don't know if that's completely accurate scientifically, but I do think it's a mix. It's something that, like if you've been creative, you've been able to, like we said earlier, like repurpose something that you never considered before, like propping a door and grabbing something like that simple. And sometimes they're more interesting to you, and you're like, oh, that's really cool that I saw that. So the purpose of the techniques is to harness the motivated part, like where you could actually voluntarily try something to shake up your thinking, to shake up how you're perceiving an object. So like if I'm sitting at a desk, and so the desk does have properties that come into mind right away about how I'm supposed to use this. But then I might, think about where these materials came from. And like, what does it mean that I have this? Like, imagine how differently you respond to a desk from IKEA versus a desk that's been handed down to you. You might use them for the same thing, but you have this sense that I might keep this desk just to have around because I use it to help me remember people I care about, or because it was important at a time in my life. So I feel like it is a mix of voluntary and involuntary. But then the next one's really interesting. I just don't know if I understand it. Is it necessarily enough to be able to recognize what's going on and open up to more distance if you don't want to? In the case of anger, I think. Let's see. Like before you're ready.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds like almost kind of the idea of is diffusion alone enough, or is there something else that maybe needs to take place once you've done it? And I think that kind of relates to that last question of like the thought action diffusion about the idea of learning about a thought and not necessarily meaning an action will occur.
Mhm.
Kind of, it seems like those two may kind of dovetail.
Yeah.
in that.
Yeah, like, so I would say maybe keeping in mind that diffusion doesn't mean you're wrong about the perspective you're holding. And by wrong, I should probably say not wrong in like even a factual way, although that could also be true, but more like if you have this anger and you have ideas about what it means and how you want to respond, that might be exactly what you do.
Mm-hmm.
So diffusion doesn't mean you're giving up that perspective or you're giving up those things you feel like need to be done, but it gives you a chance to consider options, or just feeling more like you're going to be more intentional in your life rather than the anger insisting that this has to happen. Anger can really run away from us. To be more intentional about the anger, you might even find a better solution that fits with that initial perspective, but something that will work much better. And like I've said, I feel like I can get closer to my emotions and feel them, with greater depth, like with greater meaning in things. And so you don't have to lose a perspective or be scared that like, oh, this means I'm giving in, or this means I was wrong, or anything like that. If let's say in like a case where you're absolutely right and justified in your anger and how it all played out, but if it's working in you all the time and it's getting in the way of things that aren't even related to what caused the anger, then that's a place where the diffusion can be really helpful, so that you're able to be angry and in your life, and not just in this story about what happened.
It sounds like as a whole, this is a great strategy for kind of giving yourself options to make a choice, even when the anxiety feels overwhelming or the thoughts feel all consuming. Kind of taking that step back to kind of look at all the different options and know that just having a thought or a feeling isn't necessarily, prophecy. It's not necessarily if you feel this is going to happen. This is one potential, but you still get to choose. And
right.
So knowing that we're wrapping up, I did just want to say to everyone, there is a OCD goals group that occurs right after this, and I put the Zoom information in the chat below. Jason, I just want to say thank you very much for joining us, and I always love to chat with you. I feel like we might need a part 2 to be able to kind of continue chatting as we go through. And so thank you very much for coming and for sharing with all of us. Any final thoughts or kind of final takeaways for everyone as we get close to wrapping up?
Yes, I did have one. But now I feel like maybe it's just like it's opening a whole can of worms, but it's like a surprise. So the surprise waiting for you, if you're interested in this and working on it, is thinking about your life as a story, and that fusion means you're not going to get much variety. Things are just going to be like whatever happens, whatever occurs to you first. So like with the anger example or something else, I've really come to appreciate so much more about life and knowing I'm a human, so I have humanness. So I'm going to feel all these things and have to do like a human life, but also alongside that, be able to appreciate like really crazy concepts that I like that we live in outer space. We live on a planet in outer space. This, to say it that way sounds weird, but in my life, it means, okay, if this is like, it gives me this really big perspective where I say, that doesn't mean my life doesn't matter, that I can see myself in this huge thing. It's more like, well, now I can really maybe go for it and have a full human experience of regret and love and hate and anger and all this stuff. And like really fully experience it, because I've also been up here and felt like, that life is really kind of like this mystery that like, even if you understand that something shouldn't matter so much, it will, because you're a human, you have humanness. So that's what you have to feel like. Plants have photosynthesis or birds fly. That's what we do as humans. So it's not damning that you have these things. or that because you can mentally figure out what the right way to be is, it doesn't mean you're supposed to be able to be it. That's what humans are like. So diffusion, really just helps all this other stuff come forward. Those are things I like, and so that's why they occurred to me, and I found them useful. But you'll have your own version that comes from your life, your faith, your ideas about what it means to be a human and how you want to live it. And that's the key. This anger question, it's like, I have this, but like, how do I want to be remembered, or how do I want my life to go from this point?
Excellent. I think well said for a wonderful parting words, and a way
Great.
for all of us to consider, how we move through our lives as humans, the good and the bad, from a high level view and down in the muck. So
yeah,
thank you very much, Jason, for joining us. It was a pleasure chatting with you.